Good morning. This is Weary with the MetaArchitects HUB, and today we're going to be looking at how to use the oncyber Studio Editor to work from a template we've set up. This guide has been created for the participants of the 2023 Moon Village Association Hackathon, but really it can apply to anyone who hasn't used oncyber and wants to know how it works. This week, oncyber released a massive update to their platform called World Builder. The update completely overhauls the prior Studio UI and adds some new features like the ability to create terrain without needing to use a separate 3D program like Blender. We'll go over some of these new features briefly, but for the most part, this video will focus on the basics of how to add content to the template space we've set up for this hackathon. First, go to oncyber.io and log in. There are a number of different login options, which you can find more details on in the onboarding slides, but if you've ever used a social login method, these should be familiar. Adjust your profile if you like, or continue with the default for now, and you're ready to get started. At the start of this hackathon, you should be receiving an invite link unique to your team. Once logged in, simply enter it into your browser and your team's template will load. From now on, your team's template will be accessible in the Collaborations tab found in the upper left hand of the Studio UI. By default, you'll be assigned co-curator access, which will allow you to add and edit assets in the space. With World Builder, you can now find and edit elements you've added in the box on the right called Added Components, including key template items that were previously only accessible through the backend uploader. Most of these are in the Adjust World Settings box at the top left. For the purpose of this hackathon, it probably won't make sense to edit most of these since these are already set to be appropriate for the Moon environment. That said, if you want to experiment with adjusting the landscape, you can do that with a newly released Terrain tool. This lets you modify a square plane into a number of landscape style forms without having to use 3D software like Blender. The Terrain tool is an advanced new feature, and you'll note that there are a lot of different settings and sliders that you can tweak. Similar to programs like Blender, you can assign different types of materials to the plane that you're adding, whether that's color or the grid type texture that they have under shader. Most relevant to this hackathon, however, is the ability to add image textures of your own. The base template in this file uses a photo from NASA that is extremely high res and has been divided up into separate quadrants. As an example, I've added a modified version of the texture that I used for this template to the custom image slot. This won't intersect perfectly with the existing texture or mesh, but you can see that it's kind of close. Again, you don't need to use the Terrain tool for the hackathon. In fact, there might not be many cases where you would, but if you'd like to use this texture during the hackathon, let us know and we can provide an oncyber prep version for you to use. The functionality you will likely be using the most is outside of the World Settings menu and in the icons below on the left. A good way to think about oncyber is like any content management system, i.e. WordPress, or any other sort of blogging platform. There's just one difference, it's in 3D, right? So instead of a flat page that you're adding to, you can add it in any orientation all around you. The icon with the arrow pointing up is the uploader. This will let you add your own assets from your own computer in just about any common file format. So for images, that'll be a JPEG or a PNG. For audio files, that will be an MP3, for video files, an MP4, and for 3D files, a GLB. To demonstrate this, starting with a 3D file, I've added the Moonlander model again. This is a .glb file, which has been modified from a NASA-provided 3ds file. There are a few elements in the base template that can't be edited, i.e. the Earth in the distance, the Moonlander that's already in the space when you get there, and the flags. This is because those are part of the base template, which is one GLB file. What the uploader and the other controls let you do is add on top of what's already there. So you can add your own 3D files or images or text, whatever you need to convey the message in your hackathon project. To arrange assets that you've added on top of this template in a 3D setting, you'll be using what is called a gizmo. You'll note that there are different colors for different axes and that you can move it up, down, rotate, etc. If you're not familiar with 3D software, this might seem daunting at first, but if you've ever used Blender or a lot of other programs, then you'll be right at home with the gizmo. Just experiment with it. You'll get a feel for it over time. Another key setting to pay attention to after you've added an asset is size. Just move the slider and you'll be able to easily adjust how big an object is relative to the other items in the world. When adding 3D objects, you can also toggle what is known as collisions. That means your player character or others cannot actually pass through an object that has collisions. You may note the yellow box that appears around a 3D object after you've added collisions. This is because currently oncyber can only add collisions in a cube-based shape, so it will extend to the borders of the 3D object, and that will be the place where your character cannot pass through. Next, we're going to look at adding an image. An important default to note for adding images is the difference between standard and advanced placement. Standard placement will be enabled the first time you add an image and is indicated by 4 squares at each corner. This is intended more for snapping and sliding images along walls, which really won't apply for this hackathon. To access the 3D gizmo, which you'll want to use in this case, just click the Enable Advanced Placement text and it will expand the coordinate controls, returning you to the gizmo. Another important note is the frame. By default, there will be a black backing where you can add a 2D image. If you want to make it more visible, you can add a color from the options below or select a custom one via hex or RGB codes. Selecting the checkered box allows you to remove the frame altogether. Note, however, that if you remove this, the image won't be visible from the other side. This can be handy in certain situations and is due to something called normals, which we won't get into here. For this hackathon, you may wish to stick to the default black backing option, but it's your choice. If you do lose your image, either due to removing the frame or just the general size of the template, it's easy to find now in the new World Builder UI. Just go to the Added Components menu on the right-hand side and expand the upload tree, then find the file name to select and edit your image. Next up is the text tool, which does exactly what it says. This is very similar to Blender's text tool and allows you to add 2D text to a 3D setting at any size, orientation, or color you like. There are currently 2 different primary fonts to choose from. I like to use the default myself as it has nice visibility, but both work well. Like most text-based editors, you'll note the ability to select justification for your text, as well as line height. For line height, I often go with a setting of 90 as it's similar to setting line height to 1.5 in Word. One key setting to pay attention to for the text tool is the container width, which allows you to adjust where the auto line break occurs using a simple slider. If you find that you're losing the text in the background, one handy technique I found is to add a single color 2D or 3D background with the same orientation via the uploader, as though you're adding text to a large screen or banner. Next, we're going to briefly cover the other 2 content tools you're most likely to be using in this hackathon, YouTube and IFrame embeds. Adding a YouTube video is simple and can be a great way to add informational resources to your world that you want to reference, or even that you've made and uploaded to YouTube yourself. To add a video, just select the YouTube widget below the text tool and paste in the video's URL. Placement is mostly the same as adding an image, as this will be added as a 2D plane that you can orient to your liking. There are 2 key settings to pay attention to here, starting with audio options. By default, sound from videos is set to play when a user is looking at the asset. If you click the audio icon, you can change it to a sound radius around the video, or to play everywhere at a constant volume. If you select the sound radius option, a new slider will appear, allowing you to set sound falloff around the video. The other key setting for videos is an autoplay toggle. To adjust this, just click the circle with the arrow around it and choose either option. Autoplay is typically best for adding environmental sound for creative purposes, which can get quite chaotic if you set everything everywhere all at once to autoplay with audio. That said, this is the metaverse and the creative control is yours, so if you want people to hear you scream, that is certainly a choice. Note that these controls also largely apply to adding an MP3 or MP4 of your own via the uploader. The last tool we're going to cover is the option to add iframes, which essentially lets you beam in content from around the web that users can interact with while inside your oncyber world. This is a very neat feature with some caveats. First, you'll note that you can't iframe in all websites. Many websites have code that prevent the iframing of content or require a specific API to be created for embeds. Iframes are also very performance heavy. When you add an iframe, you are essentially running another browser tab concurrently inside the oncyber browser tab, so you'll want to use them sparingly. Iframes also currently have limited mobile functionality in oncyber, so if full mobile device support for visitors of the hackathon project you're creating is a key concern, that's something to take into account. That said, there are plenty of websites that can be embedded via iframe, and you can even get extra creative by coding your own HTML content, hosting it on a server of your own, then iframing that in. That is, of course, a highly advanced approach and probably out of scope for the hackathon's duration, but it opens up a lot of interesting possibilities if you want to dive that deep. Once you're ready to see how your world is looking from a user-facing perspective, just click the preview button in the upper right-hand corner at any time. This will open a new browser tab and will let you walk around your team's world to see how everything looks. Upon accessing oncyber from the visitor's end, you'll note a pop-up in the lower right-hand corner which shows the user controls for navigating a world. If you've ever played a first or third-person video game, these controls should be familiar. Oncyber now has live editing, so edits made in the other tab should show up almost immediately in the world without having to directly save anything. One final thing to note is that if your team chooses, you can set a password on your world while working on it. This is accessed under the Customize World Settings menu, which is the cog icon at the top. Once you click that, click the second menu, which is Access Privacy. From there, just toggle on the Make Your Space Private setting, click Edit under Password Protection, choose Password, and enter an accompanying message if you like. If you're logged in and have co-curator or above access to the space, the password won't trigger for you. However, you can test that it's working by opening a separate browser session and trying to visit the URL of your team's world, at which point you'll receive the prompt. There's always more to learn, but that should at least get you started on using the oncyber platform for this hackathon. If you have any questions or run into any technical issues, I'll be making myself available as much as possible during the hackathon. Just ask for Weary. On behalf of the MetaArchitects HUB and as an oncyber ambassador, I'd like to wish all of this year's participants the best of luck. We're all excited to see the ideas you create. If you're looking for your latest 3D development project opportunity or want to learn more about building for other metaverse platforms, feel free to join us in the HUB's Discord. We welcome anyone with an interest in developing the emerging metaverse frontiers beyond.